Okay, ladies. Well, we're here for our very first working group for the Marine WIT in 2021. So our little mantra has started already with get shit done in 2021. So we're going to keep going with that theme. Today's discussion is about breastfeeding considerations, and we have members. We have Marines, some sailors, and some of our air sisters, airmen. I hate to call you guys airmen when you're women. Joining us. Oh, and some of our coasties too. So we have a whole joint force here ready to discuss breastfeeding considerations. And so just as a reminder to everyone, we are recording. And so this could be used for an education piece for some of our male leaders, as well as all those female service members that didn't get a chance to listen in because of a time constraint. We'd ask for everyone to remain professional and not name any names in any of the discussions, but rather provide context or an experience and try to keep it as generic as possible, and then provide any kind of solutions for where we could use some change. So Allison, thank you very much for offering to lead this. I'm going to turn this over to you, and maybe you could provide some outline, some points, and then Des, I think you wanted to jump in too. Go for it.
Right. Thanks, Sharon, for putting this together. I will start off that I definitely have learned a lot over these last 18 months or almost 18 months, like the significance of talking about breastfeeding in the military. I know we all have our different experiences, positive and negative, but one thing for sure is that, having this group to kind of advocate as well as educate, not just our leaders, but our service as a whole, because as we try to continuously work towards winning wars and war fighting, it's still about our people. And we have women in the military, we have women in the Marine Corps. And I've definitely learned, as a 12+ year field grade officer now, with my first child, just a different challenge in life now as a mom and a Marine. So thanks again for putting this together. So not to do too much background again, but I am coming up on 18 months of breastfeeding. I have shifted from having to pump, where I just essentially breastfeed my daughter on demand, which happens to be like morning and evening. Though I am at a school right now, which would probably provide me time. I might have to miss things here or there, but I've been fortunate enough to be in an environment for the last few years, which has enabled me to still be able to focus on the Marine Corps while also being able to prioritize being a mom in the COVID pandemic. So the education piece that I think we should probably focus on is one, everybody does experience breastfeeding differently. Some people it's easy, sometimes they have a very difficult time. It is an emotional time for women and their children. So it's not just as simple as I'm going to breastfeed or I'm not going to breastfeed. There's a lot more to it. There's planning that goes along with it. There's medical, physical, emotional, mental things that go along with it. And so I think the different experiences is going to be very key to make sure that if there are any policy adjustments that we recommend, that we always keep the caveat that there can be some leeway. It doesn't mean that everybody does it for 6 months or a year, 18 months. I personally, and this was my personal decision, try to base it off of research that I did and the breastfeeding journey that worked for my daughter and I. So we've been able to do it this long because it's worked for us. And I've been in an environment where I've been able to do that and focus on it. But I know that, again, everyone has a different story for that. So one of the main things is, making sure that our units are prepared for breastfeeding mothers when the time comes. So essentially knowing ahead of time, it may be an awkward conversation, but it's also a necessary conversation to have amongst leaders. I think that my unit allowed me to be the example because like I said earlier, I was one of the senior female officers there, senior female Marines in general there as well. So it was a way for leadership to see how I experienced it, to what they needed to do, if they needed to learn anything at the same time with, my Marines. So we actually got to a point where my Marines were ready to bring a refrigerator out to ITX so that I could still breastfeed and do that. And I was learning about different ways to get my milk home, literally putting it on the aviation maintenance runs that would go back and forth from ITX back down to Camp Pendleton on a regular basis. I ended up not having to do that because I took a different role while part of the unit went to ITX, where I helped out my XO. But a friend of mine who was in the same billet in a different unit, she did do that. She's a mom of two, both dual military as well. And so she did do that. And I actually learned that from her. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of ways to do it. I know there was some comments in some of our posts earlier about how do we, you know, not spend our entire paycheck on a lot of this stuff, and what does TRICARE actually support, or how can we utilize other funds for that. So I think that's definitely something we could study further. And then also kind of going into like the normalizing breastfeedings, you know, so people don't become uncomfortable. I heard a horrible story once where a Marine had their door closed. They even had a sign on the outside of the door, and they, you know, somebody walked in and then filed a complaint because of what they saw. That put like a bad taste in my mouth when I heard about it, and I figured like, okay, what can we do? Because it shouldn't be something that makes someone else feel uncomfortable. If, you know, we need to, again, normalize it and kind of talk about it. So the role I kind of took was I talked about it among my Marines. They knew when my door was closed what that meant. I did have one Marine walk in on me one time, but you know, he'll forever be embarrassed about that. But it was kind of funny after the fact. But you know, so they knew that it was, but I used it as like more of like, I don't want to call it a PME, but a time to kind of enable, especially my younger guys, to understand maybe why I did it, why I chose to do it. It also helped them ask some of the other Marines within the section if they planned on doing it, and if they didn't, they didn't. And it was simple for that, but they were at least now more prepared for when the time came. And they understood that it took a lot of work. You know, if we traveled sometimes, if I couldn't find a room to do it in, you know, I would stay in the car and do it, and the Marines knew what I was doing. So it was, they kind of saw like the schedule I had to have for it. And they also knew that it was important and with that. One thing I just wanted to also bring up before I forgot, before Desiree, if you want to caveat off this, but something I did learn too was not everybody loses weight breastfeeding. And I myself was an example of that. I lost a lot of weight right away, but then I'd say there was like about 10 pounds that just never left my body, no matter what I did. And I'm not talking about the way I ate over the holidays type of thing. You know, so I did some studying and found out that there are some people that they almost like hold on to it so that your body's always ready to have the amount of milk that you need. And so I thought that was important because I personally did not go back on like a strict regimen to try to get into PFT, CFT shape. I didn't work really, really hard to get back to my weight. I decided that I'm going to do what's right and hopefully get to that point. You know, I made weight when I needed to make weight, and we didn't have to run a PFT last year. CFT, some of us ran, some of us didn't have to run by the time that they canceled it again. But so I don't want to use myself as just a prime example with that, but I know it would have been a lot harder for me than normal to get back into weight, which goes into some of our other discussions on BCP and height and weight standards. So I just wanted to bring that up, that I think that's another aspect of the educational thing that, again, not everybody, it's not one size fits all. And some people don't lose weight, they actually gain weight, or they just hold on to it. So that's something, you know, to think about when we're doing that. Because if, for instance, somebody did take drastic measures, and if anyone has experiences, please cut me off, but it could lessen their milk supply, which lessens their child's ability to have the amount of nutrients that they need, which just causes a lot more problems than just making weight for the Marine Corps. So I just wanted to make sure that I hit those. But so those are just some of, yes, my own experiences, but I think some educational topics that will be really relevant for units to understand in general, as well as trying to figure out better ways for our Marines to be able to still do our jobs. Like, not everybody's going to be in a staff or a headquarters position. They're going to be in positions where they go to the field, or they do need to deploy or other ways. And I know that there are ways out there that they can still breastfeed and still make this happen for them, so that there isn't the counter argument of someone that chooses to breastfeed then cannot do their job anymore, because I think that definitely can happen. So
Yeah.
let's turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up a lot of those points, Allison. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm not a mom, and I wasn't aware of all of this. So I may ask some questions, because I know that some of the folks that might be listening might be in the same position. So, like, what is the important piece? Why is it so important? And part of our research, when we were just looking at the body composition standards, I learned that the American Association of Pediatrics, and forgive me if I didn't get that acronym exactly correct, but they're the ones that recommend the first at least 12 months, recommend breastfeeding. It doesn't have to be sole, but I think it was like the first 6 months of sole breastfeeding. And then after that, being able to supplement it with some formula and some other food and things. And the reason that they recommended that was because that they started to see a decreased rate of postpartum depression in the mom. There was a higher rate of bonding. But what was so incredible to me was it was a lower infant mortality rate, a higher level of childhood health. And I mean, it just seemed like the list of, I mean, there were plenty of other conditions too that just seemed to be just fantastic and very, very beneficial. So if a woman is able to do that, if she's able to breastfeed, which we know not everyone can, I really then started to resent when people would say, yeah, well, you chose to do that. And it was like, okay, I guess we could use the word choose, but what we're really seeing is that medical professionals are saying this is the best recommended. So I wanted to throw that out there for those that might not have that experience. And you have to pump at certain intervals once you return to full duty, or once you return to back to work, that you would have to pump in order to still maintain that 12 months. And thanks for bringing up about not being able to lose some of that weight. In fact, when I asked some other leaders, they had mentioned that in fact your body does hold on to some of that fat so that you can provide that adequate supply. So really glad to hear that you pointed that out too. So thank you. Des, I think you had some comments too, if you're ready to jump in, or if anyone else is ready to jump in, you can go for it. Des, go for it.
Yes, hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can see your little one.
Yeah, so this is John. He just turned 1 this weekend, and we've had a really good breastfeeding journey. We've had a great experience all around. Although we've hit the 12-month mark, he's still breastfeeding 6 times a day in addition to solids. So, I mean, I know Tristan Villarreal is probably smiling right now, because I think she was the first person that kind of made me aware of, oh, hey, at 12 months, you could still potentially be breastfeeding. So here we are. So yeah, those are recommendations from the American Association of Pediatrics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be like a 12-month cutoff. And some people do. Some people work it up to where at 12 months they cut their babies off. But I think a lot of people who are aware of the timelines just automatically assume that at the 12-month mark, the mom stops breastfeeding the baby. We need to create a little bit of awareness that sometimes that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it could go a little bit longer, depending on the situation. So I just want to make some points really quick. Overall, I've had a very positive experience. My PCS this summer, so when he was about 6 months, I went from one command to another, and they have both been absolutely phenomenal in the way they have supported me. And I personally have not had any issues, but I think part of that, besides having supportive commands, the entire time I've been very assertive about, and I've vocalized what my needs are. So there's never been a moment where my chain of command hasn't been aware that I need certain accommodations to be able to pump while I'm working. And so a little bit, part of that is education, and kind of going on that, on what Allison touched on, education. There's education for all sorts of age groups. I mean, there's certain you can, just because you have a senior population doesn't mean that they can't be educated in some aspects. Like, I remember my boss, one day I left my pump parts out to dry on top of the microwave, and my boss walked to the microwave and all the parts were there. And I just thought afterwards, he just saw my pump parts. And I was like, whatever. It's, it's something that he's aware of now. And he didn't say anything, but I know he saw it.
Yeah,
and
it's probably a good point to educate. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not something that he would have necessarily thought of before, but
Sure.
it was definitely on his mind now. And the same thing with our younger Marines in the office. I would make sure I didn't necessarily have to make it a public statement that, hey, I'm going to the back to pump, or because we had like a separate area in our office. But for part of it, I was an aide. So I had to tell other people, like, hey, I'm going to be gone on the days that we wore chucks, since I couldn't pump while I was wearing camis. Actually, let me take that back. I have an LV breast pump. So for those, there may be some people who don't know out there, there's a breast pump that is wireless. So you can just you can wear it in your camis, you can walk, you can do everything while you're pumping. And it was very useful. And I use it all the time, but whenever we're wearing service uniform, I can't use it because my shirt doesn't fit. So I would have to go use the actual machine where I had to hook up to, I guess.
Yeah, and I had never even heard of those until someone had posted, until there were all the comments in the team. And what I love to hear, actually, because I think some of the gals over in the Air Force were asking, well, how does this, like, who is talking to the security managers so that they can use it?
You don't have to. Oh, so that's great. So you don't have to, you can just press the buttons on the machine. You don't have to use the Bluetooth enabled device on your phone. So
yeah,
so you can control it from your phone, or you can just manually press the buttons.
Yeah, great. That's great to know, because I think some of the gals, some of our Air Force sisters were asking that question. So if we've already cracked the nut on that, that'd be great to pass along to them. But if we do find that becomes a policy issue, I mean, we certainly have people that work in SCIFs that have Bluetooth enabled hearing aids and things. Why couldn't this also be considered a necessary device? So
this is Sam Sliney. I'm from the Air Force. I can talk to that a little bit.
Go for it.
So you can get an exception to be in the SCIF, or we call it a vault, with it, because it's a medical device. So it's exactly what you were pointing out with the hearing aids. It is a medical device. So there's paperwork. I know in our WIT group, we also have a mom's breastfeeding group as well. There's templates in the Air Force that we circulate amongst each other, where you just give that to your security manager. And it shouldn't be a problem. I know that our flyers do it all the time, and our intel people that work in SCIFs have had no issues doing it. I also want to jump in. Like, I have the Willow, so I don't have the LV, but I have the Willow. I'm a JAG by AFSC by duty, and I can tell you the education piece is so important. I have pumped giving briefings to 2-star generals. I have pumped in trainings. I have pumped in the airport, on airplanes. I travel quite frequently for my job. So I remember the first time that my 06 boss, I was pumping and he wanted to chat with me. So I had my OCP zipped up. I walked out of the room, and, I do look a little bit like Dolly Parton when I am wearing it, but I was talking to him and he heard the little humming noise, and he's like, what's that? And I was like, I'm pumping. And he's like, what do you mean? And this guy was single, no kids, fast bearing 06 in the Air Force. And we proceeded to have about a 20-minute conversation about breastfeeding and pumping. And he just had questions. So I tried to be very open around my airmen, my junior airmen, and that they knew that I was doing it. And if they had questions, I really feel like when people see you doing it and not hiding it, and I think somebody was speaking to that earlier, It really empowers other people that might be a little bit more shy about it. So was I necessarily super comfortable doing that? No, but I did it because I felt like setting that example would empower others to, do it as well, and to really show the example of that, hey, you can be a mom and an officer and an airman all at the same time. Like it is possible. You don't have to choose one or the other. So it's really empowering to hear you guys doing the same thing. And I just want to also, as far as things that we're doing, if anybody here on the call, so in the Air Force, and if anybody has if this is not an issue for you guys, please just let me know. But I'm working an initiative right now in the Air Force. So we have a 1-year TDY deferment. So we can elect not to go TDY for the child's first year. I'll be honest with you, at least in my 2 pregnancies, and I breastfed my first to 18 months, and I'm still breastfeeding my 7-month-old. That just did not happen. Like as soon as I was back from maternity leave, my job just requires me to travel. So that's just is what it is. If I don't travel, there will be nothing to go on my annual evaluation. I would love it if they could just say kept tiny human alive, but that's not really going to vie well to promotion boards. So we are looking at for women who choose to go TDY. So you're not waiving that deferment. We definitely feel like women who want to do that should continue to be able to exercise that right. But if you choose to go TDY for career progression purposes, things like that, what we need to do is get coverage for the transport of breast milk back home to baby. We've gotten information from the State Department, and they actually reimburse for the transport of breast milk, whether it be shipping or, extra baggage fees on aircraft or something like that. But what we've kind of nailed it down to is we need to change the joint travel regulation, because currently it does not cover that type of shipment or that type of transport. To do that, we would obviously need tri-service support. So we're kind of looking at finding other fellow breastfeeding mamas in the other services to kind of help us start rattling the cages to make that happen. This was brought up in 2017 to the JTR, the committee that makes JTR changes. And the feedback we got from them was that across the board, all the services said there was not a need for it. At least in the Air Force.
How did they know that?
So what we were told was it was brought up, and I mean, this is very senior level, like SES people. I don't know where they got their data, but apparently people on this committee, there's one military representative and one civilian representative on the board that makes these changes. And apparently those people, how I imagined it in my head, sat around a table, somebody brought it up, and they're like, yeah, women don't need that. They don't go TDY within the first year or within X amount. So there's no need for it. And it was just kind of quash at that. And the alternative that was thrown out, I guess, from the medical community, which has, I think, shifted a little bit, was, oh, well, they can just pump and dump. They can pump while they're there and then just throw the milk away. And then they come back home. And well, for anybody who's breastfed their child, you know that it's just, first of all, it's the mental health aspect of dumping your milk down the drain. That is it's so defeating to ever have to do that. Brings a whole new meaning to, crying over spilled milk. But it's also your way, it's liquid gold. You're just throwing it in when there's a perfectly reasonable way to get it back to baby. I mean, you can ship breast milk pretty easily. There's a company called Milk Stork that does it all the time. That's all they do. So we found out the Coast Guard tried to push this change again in 2018, and they also could not get support from all of the services. I have a POC over in the Coast Guard that we've talked with. It sounds like they're on board with helping us. So if anybody from your guys' group is interested in helping us push it, through your guys' chain to make this change happen, we're really looking to create a joint effort here. I appreciate you guys letting us dial in, and it's so exciting to hear everybody's experiences.
Yeah, and Morgan from the Coast Guard just raised her hand and said, "Yeah, we're willing to help." So that's great. I see a couple other hands raised, but go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I could piggyback on Sam, I'm Tahina, and she's been really effort, but I jumped onto this project back in August. Another issue we're running into is lack of data. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so every single hurdle or every single meeting, every single presentation we've come up with, the first question they ask is, where's the data? Well, unfortunately, this is not something that's being tracked. And so we don't have any data, at least in the Air Force. And so the quick answer everyone is resorting to is, well, if there's no data, then there's nothing to go off of. So additionally, into what Sam said, which is definitely our ultimate goal, is if there's any way that that the Marine Corps is tracking this, it would be wonderful to be able to compile data. We've mentioned different ideas of how to approach this to acquire data, but as she mentioned, definitely what we're looking for is kind of a joint effort for this, but data is definitely something that's also lacking.
Yeah, I don't think we tracked that either unless someone knows of an answer. That seems to be something that we keep running into, not just on this topic, but on so many other topics. There's just not data. Well, it's like, okay, well, you're not going to have the data unless you actually study it. And we know that there's a process and funding and things like that. So if someone has the $1 million idea of how we collect this data without having to jump through all those hoops, it would be really awesome. We'd love to hear about it. But a couple other hands were up. Tahina, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Yes, I just, since you mentioned ideas, one of the ideas that we briefly started talking about, we're not sure, it's definitely not something that we've agreed on and on any level, but one of the things that we talked about, a potential idea, is the upcoming C Services Leadership Association, the Joint Women Leadership Symposium in August. If we do manage to be able to get POCs from all of the services and, kind of present the idea to present on this topic at the symposium, and then maybe do a survey right then and there, to be able to collect data on the spot, and then use that data to kind of forward our big objective of changing the JTR. But that's definitely something, it's in its infancy, that has been briefly mentioned, and that has not been really thought out much more than what I just said.
That's a great idea. Okay. Des, I think you and Maria, you guys are both patiently waiting. Whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, hey, sorry, I didn't get to finish.
She's on
I'll keep it quick since I know we've been here for a while already. So again, pointed out education, definitely make sure even you're talking to everyone and just normalize the whole thing from start to finish. And it's good for the for the more senior folks who are older, just because they're aware that their Marines are going through this. And then for those younger ones, you're just educating them. And then if you try to also relate it to if they have a spouse who potentially has a child or is pregnant, I've found that that's always, it starts a longer conversation as well. Or maybe they have a sister or something like that. Kind of try to relate it back to them, and it makes them a little bit more interested in the topic. And then for those that don't know, the LV is now partially covered by TRICARE. So before you had to pay for it out of pocket fully, like I paid for it completely out of pocket, and one of my friends just had her baby in November and she only had to pay $50 for it because TRICARE covered the rest. So the LV is a game changer. I can't stress that enough. And kind of going back to what Allison said, the whole for breastfeeding. Yes, there is a connection to breastfeeding and weight loss because of hormones. And we can have a whole separate meeting on how fitness, postpartum fitness and diet all relates to breastfeeding, and it's one big loop. I don't want to focus too much on that because that's a whole other conversation that we can be here for hours talking about. But long story short, lack of calories definitely impacts milk supply. And sometimes you may be able to lose the weight, but the majority of the weight, but there may be a little bit of a stubborn weight that's still there while you're breastfeeding. And trying to go on a weight loss cut is not the best idea for milk supply. if you want to keep milk supply. If you don't care about maintaining your milk supply, then go for it. Cut weight in a healthy manner, but it's definitely going to impact your milk supply. And if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer anything. But other than that, that's all I have.
Great, thanks. Maria or Jess? I think you guys.
I'll jump in. It's Maria. So I think that we're talking a lot about the education piece regarding like normalizing breastfeeding, and we're talking about it at like the grassroots level. Like, what can we individually do as breastfeeding mothers, as leaders? But what I would also say is perhaps we should look at it at the macro level, service level. What can we do to educate our leaders? And I would also say, is the policy even adequate the way it's written currently? Or, are there considerations that aren't included in that policy? Could it be a standalone policy? I think that there are a lot of gaps in there that we've already talked about, but also for things like TDYs or being in field environments. I mean, because that's going to be a very different set of requirements than the room with running water, private space with running water. So I think that would be important to look at the policy and say, are there gaps, or is it sufficient as it's written? And then what can we do at the service level to educate leaders, while also obviously at our own level discussing it and normalizing it.
Good.
Yeah, completely agree. And if you have any suggestions, or anyone else has any suggestions on that, I mean, we're all yours. Jess, did you have a comment?
I did. I think going off of what Maria said, my experience in the OPT4 doing service level training, whether it's 29 Palms or Yuma, I saw, especially in the air wing, Marines having to make really hard choices that they shouldn't have to. When it comes to the field environment, I don't think it is fair as an institution that we put that on the Marine who may be 23 or 24, a young NCO, and tell them, hey, well, do you want to go to the field? Because obviously they think the right choice is yes. So we were out in the field. It's February in North Carolina. It's a lovely 34 degrees and raining. And I had at least 4 or 5 breastfeeding mothers, some that had just returned off of convalescent in a limited duty status, being taken to the field. I raised objections many times. It didn't persuade my boss to do anything, who happened to be a father of 5 whose wife was still breastfeeding. So all these Marines were taken to the field. I gave up my personal birthing area so that they could pump, because at least I had electricity, but it was not heated. And we had women getting infections, mastitis, they're having to do BAS trips. And the entire time I'm being vocal, which I appreciated that Des said that she was aggressive, as if we didn't know that. And all the people on this call are usually pretty good for advocating for themselves and advocating for their Marines. But like Maria said, there should be zero ambiguity about what the right decision is when it comes to the policy, so that an misinformed CO doesn't make a bad choice, and we're not leaving it up to young Marines to choose between what they think is their career and taking care of their child. So I agree that this needs to be a detailed look at the order and remove the ambiguity that allows people to take breastfeeding moms to the field and subject them to unhealthy and unfair conditions. So
Yeah, it's incredible.
that's my 2 cents on that. I personally did not have any problems being a major in nursing. Again, I took the rental car. It was raised in an IG complaint that I had the rental car so that I could breastfeed at 29 Palms, but at the end of the day, it didn't go anywhere. But when it comes to, where do Marines nurse? They shouldn't, or pump, they shouldn't be hopping from room to room. It should be a dedicated room. And even when I dedicated a room in my S3 for those women, I would often see Marines like, storing their bike in there, or, having personal space in there. I was like, that's not what this room is for. So every day is an opportunity to educate somebody on important things like this, but we need to protect Marines with a policy that advocates for breastfeeding as long as they want in a safe and efficient manner.
Yeah, well said. We have a couple other hands that are up. Allison, Jennifer, and Des, if you guys want to jump in.
So a couple of things that you guys brought up, I wonder if it's like beneficial if we take a look at the most updated order right now and then essentially write like some of our own recommendations, and whether, everyone sends it to me and then I can kind of combine it from Sharon or whatnot. We can figure that piece out, but like what's really missing, because there's great points with the ambiguity, because there's going to be leaders that are putting their Marines on the scale when they're not supposed to, and then there's going to be Marines, just like just brought up, forcing Marines that, do they have to go to the field right now? Like, is it detrimental? Again, I was in a command that realized my situation, and didn't necessarily force me to make those decisions. And then I saw another section that was like, it was, oh yeah, we don't need her in the field. She can do her job back here right now. When you split 50-50, and I'm not talking about an entire unit necessarily going all the time. So they realize that they can prioritize and utilize other people that have the same job. And, it just makes us have to think a little bit more. It's not difficult, but it's just a way to kind of make sure we are really taking care of especially our young Marines. And then I'm really happy to hear that TRICARE is starting to cover some of the other costs, because pretty sure I spent like over $400 on my Willow after I already had the other pump, and the amount of supplies that I've bought. And I know that TRICARE will cover some of that stuff, but it also is a lot of work to then do all those claims. It's just so much easier sometimes to just go on Amazon and get what I need. But the other aspect of it, I know we've talked about how much more we tend to pay on uniforms as women in the military. And now we have the other aspect to it of all the other things that go along with breastfeeding. And I'm sure, and I can look it up too, there's probably like a class on it somewhere that we can then adjust and adapt to the military. And I'm not saying we make it like annual training, but it can kind of help us focus our thoughts a little bit to make sure we're not missing some of the more crucial aspects of it. Because, another benefit to breastfeeding is also, it's like, I'm not saying cancer prevention, but there's a less chance of getting certain cancers if you do breastfeed. And, just a quick personal story. Unfortunately, my sister was recently diagnosed with breast cancer after she had her child. And it had a lot to do with like the hormones she got from pregnancy. She breastfed for a little bit, but had some difficulty. But if it wasn't that difficult since she had breastfeeding, they probably would have never known that she had the cancer, to be honest. So I immediately went and got checked. My sister's younger than me, so for her to have it, and I was fine. And I'm not saying that's because I'm breastfeeding, but it just kind of made me realize that, maybe some of the benefits that science has shown, are other good things for us to just be aware of, because not to say that I may never get it, but, that is another thing that's also beneficial to moms, is just some of the other medical aspects that goes along with it. So yeah, I think, just to kind of cover that again, if we find a really good class on breastfeeding, we can kind of then tailor it. And then I think it would be beneficial to have specifics in the order about the field environment. You can't just go and pump in any tent. You shouldn't be sitting on the ground in the middle of the dirt doing it. So there's a lot of considerations that take place, but it's definitely something that can happen. I am. So,
Thanks for that. Jen, do you want to jump in?
Yes, you're gonna have to just don't mind my baby's loud breathing and coughing. So first, there's a lot of different things that we were talking about here. When we talk about lactation rooms, it sounds like most people had like an opportunity to have their own office when they did that. I work in cubicles. The lactation room I work in the Marsh Center, so I do work at MNRA. It's a great lactation room, but there's no computer access. So I think there's and the other place that I worked at, there wasn't also computer access as well. And so when we're working in these rooms that are, you know, converted rooms, oftentimes I've had to go through, one place was through the conference room. So if you can imagine the conference room area, you had to walk through there to get to a room. There's another room that I know of that you have to walk through a gym to get to the room. And there's a perception from the males that you're hiding out and you're not like trying to get out of work. And so honestly, I put a whiteboard, one of those whiteboards, I put it at the entrance to my cubicle and I just pump right there. My baby's 7 months old. The LV was not covered 7 months ago. So my pump is loud. I don't do breastfeeding to like bond with my baby. I did have that with my first child, but my baby's special needs. This is purely because the immunologist said like this is the best way for his health because he's immunocompromised. So it is important that other people understand like it's for the health of the child. It's not, there's no bonding to this. All I do is pump milk because any immunity I can give him, he was hospitalized for like a rhinovirus, the common cold. So it is, if the immunologist is saying the best thing I can do for my child is pump breast milk for as long as I can, for however many years I can, to give him any extra, his immunity, any boost, I think that's probably applicable to everybody, whether or not you have an immunocompromised child or not. Yeah, and so he's G-tube fed, so he's attached to a line. But I think if the TRICARE is paying for LV, that's great. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late, I think, for a lot of people. In fact, my first child, you got to buy the pump straight out. So they didn't even cover breast pumps when I had my first child. So yeah, that's it. Sorry, I got to take care of him.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's, if maybe, I don't know what the discriminatory aspects are of this, but if there's a kind of special consideration given to active duty service members for the LV pump or whatever the wireless pumps are, since it would actually help to increase readiness, because then you'd be increasing the amount of time that you're kind of spending at work, I guess. I don't know if that's something that perhaps anyone would want to look into, but just a thought. Bridget, you had a comment.
Okay, there you go. I'm on unmute now, right? Okay. No, I just wanted to say, like, well, first of all, like she said, like so I've had 4 kids. My newest one is like 3 weeks old now. And like she said, like my first kid, I had to buy the pump outright, but I was like, talked to my husband into it because I showed him like the cost of formula and all this other sort of stuff. But like just over like the 8 years that I've been having kids, like I've seen like a lot of awesome changes due to groups like this. So like I said, from my pump not being covered to having 6 weeks of maternity leave to now 12 weeks. And I think that one thing that I've seen across all the comments on this is that like the very small percentage of female Marines out there that have had kids and that have breastfed, like the group of cadre of us out there, like that I've come across, we've all like gone like beyond bent over backwards almost to try and like go out of our way to like talk to, like I kind of like, to me, I'll personally like just like see like a random pregnant female Marine, the PX, and like start talking to her about breastfeeding, just because I feel like it's something that like if you don't talk to them, you don't know if they have another female in their command that's been breastfeeding. I mean, if they aren't going to breastfeed, it can get a little bit awkward. If they like have very decidedly not doing it, that can be a little bit awkward. But anyways, I just wanted to say like kudos to all the girls that I've met that have been carrying on the torch and, bending over backwards to help out the Marines. I think that's come a long ways, and groups like this that are willing to talk to people higher ups to make those bigger changes that like one person can't make, like the maternity leave or the TRICARE covering things. So that's all. I just wanted to say like, yay, all of us, give ourselves a pat on the back and keep going. And I'm definitely willing to help out with whatever I can as far as sharing experiences. I guess the only downside to my pumping journey over the past 4 kids, and I've done me personally, like my goal is to make it to like a year of pumping at the workplace. And then after like a year of pumping at the workplace, I'm like, okay, kid, like I'll nurse you like during lunch or, morning at night. But like for me personally, like pumping during the work day, like I kind of cut it off at a year, but all my kids have nursed over a year. My latest one nursed like almost 2 years, I think. Anyways, I forgot where I was going with that. I still have pregnant brain, even though
I think it might have actually been off of one of the comments that Allison had made previously before we started recording, and she had said that kind of the expectation if you had to go and be with your baby, that there might be an expectation for more time. I don't know if that was your train of thought. It kind of sounded like
it was. Thank you. And so that's another thing is also and in the same vein as far as like helping people, I feel like there is like like that very very small minority that they always talk about, about how, oh, that female just got pregnant to get out of deployment, like that type of like a myth that's out there. I feel like there's like the same type of stigma almost around like breastfeeding, like, oh, like you said, it's like a couple of people mentioned it's not really a break. Like you're still usually like me, I'm normally still like doing something at a computer or like reading something. I'm usually not just sitting there like, rah, rah, rah. But I think that there's that like small thing that's still out there. Like I still hear, get the eye roll when I'm saying that I'm going to go pump, and they're like, oh, okay. But I think anybody that's worked with me knows that like, they know the deal, and that I'm not doing anything for 30 minutes or however long it takes. But yeah, my main thing was just giving kudos to everybody that's out there and to just keep doing, I think like a big part of what's made this all successful is the leadership at the small unit level. And, those of us that have or have not had kids, just either way, just being able to reach out and normalize the conversation more. That's all.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Danny.
Hi, can you hear me? Thanks for putting this together. This is Brian. Yeah, so I think everyone's making really amazing points. And the only thing I would add for breastfeeding is that there's also a major cost savings to the junior Marine. TRICARE covers baseline pump models. And I think that's something that, at least to get started in your journey, outside of doing something that's more comfortable for your preferred method or place, going wireless or more discreet, it at least gets them a pump, right? And then, having the order at least gets them then a place to do it. And so there's an associated cost savings for the Marine, sailor, airmen who can then go and pump. What the struggle then becomes is the interpretation of that act and the space that they require and how to make it easier for them and all these other things we're talking about. So I think just at a minimum, leaders knowing that a lot of our junior folks who start their families young or at a younger rank, a lot of times it's a cost savings. And then, for example, something like COVID, where there's binge buying and the price of formula goes up even more, there's an even greater demand and emotional and physical stress that you put yourself under to provide milk for your loved one, to try to, again, step aside those additional costs. So just another consideration. I think we're hitting all amazing points, but you chose to breastfeed. Some people, it is the choice. There's not much in the other way for some of our personnel to go to. And, we teach budgeting classes. We have all these amazing resources for Marines who are trying to, ball on a budget their way through life, right? So breastfeeding is just yet another method and tactic that some families are utilizing. And, kind of like Jennifer was saying, for some people, it's not about the bond. It is their choice of what I say choice like there's another option. It is the option that they have, the best option for their family. And I think that's something that leaders need to recognize too.
Awesome. Thank you. Morgan.
Hi, I am an 05 in the Coast Guard, and I've got 3 kids that I've breastfed all of them. So my oldest is 10. I breastfed him for 15 months. My youngest, or my middle, I guess now, is 5, and I breastfed him for more than 2 years. And then my youngest is almost a year now, and we're still going. I just wanted to let you know about some of the things that the Coast Guard does that might be beneficial to the Marines, as I've been listening to this conversation, to see if there's a few differences. The first is that our Not all of our lactation rooms, like we definitely have some that have been converted storage rooms, right? But the ones in our larger areas are locked on the outside with a cipher code to be able to get in, or cat card enabled. And that's really helpful to not have all that extra gear be in the rooms. And then also for protection of the women. In one of my previous units, we definitely had people walk in on us and we filed an EEO complaint. They left the door open so that we were exposed to the office that the room was in, with like 15 people in that office working there. So that was not ideal. And after that, we made sure that some key code locks were on all of the doors from there on out. That's helpful. Another thing that the Coast Guard has done in their major commands is purchase hospital grade pumps for the lactation rooms. And that is really nice because the hospital grade pumps are more efficient at getting milk out than the standalone pumps are that we all get through TRICARE. So they, and on top of that, we don't have to lug our pump back and forth every day to work, right? So like now, I'm walking in with if I go into the building, I've got my computer that I have to go back and forth with for teleworking. I've got the kid that's going into daycare. I've got all of her food because daycare is not providing food right now since they're at a lower rate for COVID. And then if I had to bring my pump, I would have that plus all of my food and parts and workout gear. And that is a lot to take through security and to walk through to where I have to work. So just being able to not bring in that pump is just amazing. And it's more efficient at getting my breast milk out. So that's very helpful. Our breastfeeding policy is it is not vague, but it is open. So there is no restriction on breastfeeding for a year. You are allowed to breastfeed for as long as you want to breastfeed. So I know of women who have breastfed for 4+ years while they've been active duty, and there's no restriction there. Another point is that all of our units are required to have lactation rooms if it's possible. So like our ships are not possible to have lactation rooms, but we have birthing spaces on there where they can breastfeed. And our Coast Guard Mutual Assistance does reimburse for breast milk transport. And that's for all of our active duty members, our reservist, and our civilian staff or spouses that are working full-time and also have to travel. We would definitely prefer for the JTR to cover that, but right now our mutual assistance is covering it for all of us up to $700 a year, which is very nice. And that's helpful for PCSs especially, right?
That's a
So
great point, because we have a
Yeah.
Navy Marine Corps Relief Society that every year we go through a drive to help support. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So I think breastfeeding is looked upon very well in the Coast Guard. It's highly considered, it's functional. We definitely have some room for improvement. It's hard to like fly a 60 with a 6-hour sortie where you can't get out of the cockpit area for that. Our C-130 pilots don't have as much of a hard time. And then sometimes our small boat stations where we have our junior enlisted members have a hard time if they're out on the small boat for a long time. And that's where those portable wireless breast pumps would be really beneficial for us as well. Overall, I think it's a great experience for us. I think our policy is pretty well written. Happy to share it with you or any other questions that people might have as they're looking to see about improvements within the Marine Corps.
That's awesome. Thank you. And also too, for anyone that wasn't aware of this, there is actually a GSA approved lactation pod. So any unit that doesn't have the facility available, they can actually just go through, there's already a GSA approved pod. They can just get that lactation pod dropped off at their unit. So I know there's some logisticians here in the crowd, but all they have to do is just go right on there. If you think about it, it's in many of our military hospitals. So, I mean, we already know how these things work. It's probably just reaching out to whoever that logistician is over at the hospital to maybe work through that process. Thank you. Des, you had a comment. You had your hand up.
Yeah. Just quick ideas to summarize a lot of what we've discussed. I think we should probably just take the current policy, do a policy scrub, and include recommendations that consider all these special scenarios, and just scrub the whole thing and make sure that we're including things that people don't normally consider. And then the second thing is, the Commandant's planning guidance says that a Marine shouldn't have to choose between being a Marine and being a parent. So let's find somebody at MCU or whoever's in charge of the commander's course, probably Dimkus. And how about we include a brief on parenthood at the commander's course?
That's a great recommendation.
So that way, all of the command sergeant majors and all the commanders themselves are, if they know that it's being briefed in the course, then it's important to the commandant. And if it's important to the commandant, then it needs to be important for them. And maybe they'll start, and in there you can include everything from fitness policies to breastfeeding, and you cover everyone, all sorts of scenarios, adoption, whatever. That way you make it a solid brief. And obviously we don't have any specialists to talk about niche topics like breastfeeding. We can bring in a lactation consultant that can hit that. I mean, maybe medical, they have them for a brief. It's just a matter of telling them, hey, can you come here and give a 15-20 minute brief to these commanders? Oh yeah, sure. What date and time? I'm sure they could make it over. I mean, you may even have some in Quantico or Belvoir that can make it out on a specific date. So I mean, I think those, if we attack those two things, I think you can see some solid changes.
Great recommendation. Kristen.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Hey, I'm Kristen. I'm actually an OBGYN at Camp Pendleton. So I'm the medical person here. I am so excited to hear everything that everybody's talking about. I'm actually working with First MLG at Pendleton to create a pregnancy and postpartum program that's command sanctioned and has policy behind it. And part of that is to educate our Marines about this kind of topic during their pregnancy, but then also to educate the leaders. And I'm actually briefing the EXO and CO symposiums next week. So I'm taking a lot of what we're discussing today and going to be adding it to that. So I'm here to be a resource for everybody. I'm also a mother of two. I've breastfed both of them. I've pumped in random places at work. So I'm happy to add my own experiences into this as well. But I just want you to know that there's a lot of support from medical to do this as well. And I think just talking to my colleagues and to more people through the Marines, there's a lot of like kind of an organic groundswell of people looking at these issues. So I'm here if there's any comments or what I can do to help. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jess.
Hey, ma'am. One, I appreciate that General Shea is doing those things. And I know that I didn't see Gunny Pender on the call, but I know that she's been a strong voice out there at First MLG trying to make this something that commanders take action on. So from the order, Marines may be excused from field exercises if, in consultation with a healthcare provider, it is determined the Marine could be exposed to harmful chemicals or appropriate lactation facilities. I mean, has anyone been to the field that has not experienced the best of hygiene conditions? I mean, this is where I'm confused, because ultimately it's the commander's call, even if in consultation with the healthcare provider. I mean, is there ever an appropriate lactation facility in a field environment? This is where I get confused. I think Tristan dropped off the call, but I was wondering if anybody had any background on why that. I know it was a recommended change when we did the order scrub in 18. I just didn't know if anybody knew why we continued to give the commanders the discretion on that. Open question to the group. I don't know.
Oh, Sharon, you're still
Oops.
muted.
Sorry, yeah, I see a lot of head shaking no, so I don't know, but that's probably a really good RFI to send out there. I mean, I know ultimately we want to set the conditions for female Marines to be, all Marines to be as successful as possible. And so, I think that there's a way to work a policy, and Jess, I think this is what you're getting at, like that a Marine can work with their command to ensure that the conditions are set for them to still feed their baby, while also still participating in an exercise if necessary, if they're needed. So yeah, okay. Jess, did you have anything else? Okay, Allison?
So one of the things I was thinking about too is when we do look at like the order, and yeah, we have like a lot of orders that are separate right now, but also like kind of correlate to one another. And obviously with breastfeeding, like we want to make sure that pieces to that are now in like the physical fitness order. So I can't, and please don't quote me on this, I'm not exactly sure if this was the exact reason, but I don't believe the amount of months that in the Marine Corps that we have to get back into standards actually has a lot of science base behind it. And this is just, again, kind of more hearsay, but I think that needs to be researched to make sure that there is actual science. So for instance, if they say that it is highly recommended to breastfeed from at least 6 months, at least up to a year or longer. So again, I'm going on 18 months now. Now, I think there has to be years of studies to really determine like if we do more than 12 months. So say like the Marine Corps is like, all right, not saying you can't breastfeed after 12 months, but we're going to give you the opportunity to breastfeed for at least 12 months. Once you stop too, it's not just like everything goes back to normal. I know that people have experienced like their bodies went through so much after they stopped breastfeeding that they were seeing doctor after doctor after doctor because they couldn't figure out why they were sick all the time, among other things. So it's almost as if you need like a few months after the fact. So I think it was one of the other initiatives that was looking at, say, maybe they say 15 months because it gives you about 3 months after the fact. So I think it's important that if we do this, like I'm very guilty myself right now being at command and staff. I wanted to write about this topic, but I couldn't find enough to write about. So now I'm writing about something completely different. But I do think it's really important, and whoever can sometime find the time to do it, it's just going to take a lot of research, and a lot of research that it's more like survey research and trying to get to the, the military hospitals, because we mentioned it earlier, it's just not out there.
Yeah. So one of the recommendations, Allison, when we were talking about body composition, and we've been briefing all of our senior leaders, is to set the conditions for a postpartum Marine to be able to nurse their child for 12 months. And then after that, be able to go and start training for passing PFT, CFT, and height and weight standards. Because one of the points that we've been making is no other medical condition, and I'm not necessarily just saying that pregnancy is just a medical condition, but no other medical condition do we say we put a timeline on recovery other than pregnancy. So for example, if a Marine breaks their ankle, we're not like, hey Marine, 3 weeks, that's it, get back in shape and go run a PFT or CFT. So why do we do it with pregnancy? No, for any kind of other injury, and again, not equating this to an injury, but by saying here we go, you talk to a competent medical professional, the doctor then says, okay, now you're going on to physical fitness or physical therapy, and then you start training for your PFT, CFT. That just makes a little bit more sense to rely on a competent medical professional. I will say that just about every single leader has favorably endorsed this, so it is being considered at the highest levels, and I really do hope that we'll see some movement here soon. So we've been really pushing for that. Des, it looks like you can speak to the timeline a little bit, so go for it.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that change in 2017. Again, this can be a whole other session, but wave tops in 2017, when the order was being revised, myself, Jess Carlin, Christy Metz Everett, and some other folks were trying to do a push to have BirthFit incorporate some of the tenets of BirthFit into our fitness program, and there was a lot of analysis. So that 9-month period was not chosen arbitrarily. It was my very specific recommendation to the action officer who was working on it was 12 months, a minimum of 12 months for recovery postpartum. And she looked at me and she told me, that's not going to get approved. Can we do 9 months? Because nobody will fight back on 9 months. And quite frankly, I was the aide to a 4-star at that time. I was doing this as a side project of love with some other people. I didn't have time to devote more than I already was for all this. So there you go. That's where the 9 months came from. It's not that there wasn't research. I still have all the binders for all of this with the original paperwork, recommendations. I worked with people from BirthFit headquarters that actually looked over my stuff, gave me some recommendations, citations, references, the whole body of work. There is strong evidence for 12 months. But that was the long story short. They were trying to do, and I get what she was trying to do. She was trying, 9 months wasn't too much of a radical change. So nobody kind of looked at it twice. They just kind of approved it. Whereas I think if we would have put 12 months in there, more questions would have started popping up. If I could go back and I would have had the whole time, I would have kept on arguing for the 12 months. But at that time, hey, 9 months, better than 6. But I definitely agree that it's something that we need to change, especially now postpartum. I was lucky enough that I was within my 9-month period. I didn't have to do the PFT, and then the CFT conveniently got canceled a couple days before I was going to take it. And I've healed properly because I've followed the timelines. I did all the stuff that BirthFit said to do. And, I'm not peeing my pants when I run. I don't have my 18 pull-ups like I did beforehand. I can only do 6 right now at a year postpartum, but I'm okay with that. And
yeah,
anyhow, that's where the 9 months come from.
That's a really, really great perspective, because also too, Des, you've been vocal on the comments too, that BirthFit, that's what you used, but it might not be affordable to a young Marine. And so shouldn't those same kind of lessons learned be applied to the postpartum recovery period? Because, and Kristen can probably comment on this too. I mean, the OBGYN, of course, can provide that really great guidance, and is especially the expert at delivering a baby, but they might need to seek additional assistance from the evaluation of a physical therapist in order to really fully say, yes, you're ready to go to that next step, to your point about just having some proper pelvic floor muscle tone, and getting that back. No, thank you. Thanks. So, well, like I said, I'd want to emphasize that so far the discussions have been extremely positive and moving in the right direction for 12 months to be set, largely because we explained the benefits of breastfeeding. And then also too, to say, because even with 9 months, it's like, okay, it's 40 weeks to build a baby, like 40 weeks full gestation, but then yet we would give only, what is it? I'm not going to do math in public, but essentially like 36 weeks for recovery. Like, it just didn't really make any sense. So when a lot of our leaders saw those two numbers compared, they're like, okay, this just makes a little bit more sense to look at it. And to your point, we might not still have it right. The goal is to keep studying it, which we've never done. So awesome. Carrie, you're jumping in.
Yes, I just have a general question. I know you mentioned that you followed the timelines. Question for anybody in the group: did any material that was produced by the Marine Corps for postpartum, getting back in shape and all that. Did any of that help, or was that even available? Have you looked into it? Please tell me what you think.
We started those working groups in January of 2018 after a lot of pressure, and we have yet to see something come out. I've advocated several times asking for Force Fitness to please take off the Army's fitness program off of their website, and actually provided feedback onto why that program can be more harmful than beneficial. So to clarify, when I say I did the timeline, a couple things. I basically, fitness is basically, I guess you could say, like my part-time job, even though I don't have a job right now. So I was, for 2 years before I got pregnant, I was educating myself on pregnancy, on fitness during pregnancy and postpartum. And that's why I started bringing up a lot of this stuff to the Marine Corps, trying to see if we could educate our Force Fitness instructors on how to properly utilize some of this knowledge of a program like BirthFit that actually had some scientific backing through it. Force Fitness has not produced anything yet. They are, I mean, there is a guidebook, but all the guidebook says, and I mean, I think the captain who was in charge of it, I mean, she did what she could, but all it really says is eat healthy, exercise, make sure you sleep. It's not giving, it talks at the macro level about fitness items. And when I'm talking about it's very high level. I'm getting a master's degree in exercise science and strength and conditioning. And I even had to look up some of the terms. So not trying to insult anyone's intelligence, but if a Lance Corporal picks that up, they're looking for what exercises can I do right now? What can I do? What can I not do? They're not looking, they're not going to know a lot of this terminology, and they're just going to throw that packet away.
This is Ray. I'm going to jump in real fast to answer Carrie's question. So I was in pelvic floor physical therapy after my 4th child was born. And I took that guidebook and I showed some of those exercises to my pelvic floor physical therapist. And I mean, she literally just shook her head. Like, it's not safe for, like Desi just said, if a Lance Corporal is picking that up and those are like example exercises, it doesn't have the appropriate step up, step down modifications. Desi mentioned, eat healthy. I think it literally says you're not eating for 2. I mean, if we're going to do this correctly, then it's got to have the correct modifications. And I think to go along with sort of the BCP conversation, there needs to be a clearance from a physical therapist, not the OB. The OB is going to say you're good to go. I mean, every four children, 6 weeks postpartum, they're always going to say you're good to go. And what does that even mean? So, clearance from his physical therapist. And then to go along with the guidebook, I think there should be a nutrition guidebook, because if we're talking about having trouble losing the weight postpartum, then we need to make sure that we're doing the right things prenatally. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because oftentimes the old wives' tale of just saying you're eating now for 2, that doesn't mean that you're eating entire bag of Cheetos. There still has to be a proper emphasis on the right nutrition for a developing baby. In reference to, so for those that are listening who may be having a baby soon or might not know this, what disappointed me to hear was that postpartum women didn't just programmatically receive a referral to physical therapy, and that you actually had to ask for it, and in some cases even beg for that basic care. So for everyone that's listening right now, if you just had a baby, then you need to ask your doctor for a referral for these if you're experiencing some of these issues. So a pelvic floor therapist, and also as as someone who has just had to advocate for her care so much, if there's a span of more than 30 days or 30 days or more with a military facility, then you can ask to be referred out in town. So please know that that's an option for you. So please, please, please ask for those things, because it will only help you get back into shape better and not hurt yourself. Maria, do you still have another comment? Looks like your hand's still raised.
No, that's it.
Okay, sorry. Anyone else have any comments before we wrap this up? Because I think the recommendations we have so far are to do a good scrub of the current order, and then also to provide any of those recommended changes, and then also to provide an output of it would be some good commander's course, sergeant's major course kind of education piece, which it looks like Dr. DeSantis and her team, they're already working to build something like that. So chances are we could probably just piggyback off of that, or someone could just help with that. Allison, do you have another comment?
So I just want to let everyone know I'm jumping on a leadership and education symposium for my old unit tomorrow, talking about like the 4 pillars of health. So it talks about like mental, physical health. So everything that some stuff we talked about today, but it's going to be a variety of things. So I'm going to let them know that we are talking about this at different levels, and see if there's any other feedback I can get from them. But essentially I'm on like the leadership panel to talk about what I've done. And most of what I'm going to talk about is what I wish I would have done, to be honest. I'm sorry, my daughter got stuck under the table. But no, and then to Desiree, I think the birth fit is like the perfect program to like mirror for the Marine Corps. I did like the first 6 weeks and it like really set me up, but then I had some other issues. So, you know, I have a lot of work to still do, but I think it's important because, for instance, I recently went back to the pelvic physical therapist and she's like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, this is something that I should have known. I mean, I knew it, but I mean, I feel like medical personnel should have told me this, you know, a long time ago. And then I also have some other stuff that occurred during my labor and delivery that has prevented me from, you know, starting to have kids again, or getting back as quickly as I needed to. And I just feel like I'm an expert on my own body, but I'm not an expert to know if I'm like really ready, especially as Marines. We probably will do more than we should. And I think this actually goes for all service members. We're going to put ourselves through a lot more than we should sometimes. So I do think that they're almost like we have like a FASMO guidebook, an inspection guidebook. We almost need like a guidebook for just being a parent in the military too, as a commander, for people to know. But no, again, just appreciate all that. I have to go say goodnight to my daughter, so Mike can put her to bed now. But you know, thanks everyone for taking the time tonight, and Sharon for putting this together. And I really look forward to seeing what we can do from here. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks for sharing. Carrie, you had another question?
Not so much a question, but I think, so the end of this conversation, I know that this particular discussion was focused in on breastfeeding, but clearly I think that the next conversation that we have, or working group that we have, is postpartum fitness, and possibly getting some birth fit, if we can get somebody from birth fit in, and any other experts that may be able to join. I know for a fact, I know a doctor who is a pelvic floor expert, so I can ask her to join in. She's also a reserve Marine. So I think we probably need to do something along that, just to help those that have already gone through, or input from those that have already gone through this, but also to make sure that we're not harming ourselves and our futures to try to get back into shape sooner than we probably should. That's it. You're muted.
Sorry, yeah. So talking about, I completely agree with you, Carrie. So some postpartum fitness and really looking at that, making sure that Marines aren't hurting themselves, some of the resources in order to receive the proper postpartum care. And perhaps that's probably a great partnership with our Navy docs to help to see where there might be maybe a stumbling block, or to help just make that a bit more programmatic. It looks like also some adjustments to access to lactation rooms to include GSA pods. Maybe that's part of a discussion, especially especially going to each of the units. Increased accessibility to, I'm reading the notes here, enhancements to lactation rooms, scrub of the order, and then possible output is discussion to commanders courses. I think that we covered just about everything, unless anyone else has any other thoughts. So the next step for this is, this was a really great discussion. We'll post this on SoundCloud. We'll also post this on IGTV. So the video version will be on IGTV. So people will be able to pull it down and hear it. If you want to pass this on to any of your members, any of your brothers, I think that it's such a great opportunity to help educate and at least open up some discussions. What we'd like to do though next is we'd really need someone to lead each of these initiatives. So if someone is interested in leading some of these initiatives, we really do need you to step up. I think Allison previously said she would take on the scrubbing of the order, but please, this is where we really need help. Because the handful of us that kind of coordinate, we wouldn't be able to do it and help advocate, but we are happy to help put you in front of the right people who will help advocate, especially at the very senior levels, who have already expressed great support for these initiatives. So ladies and gentlemen, unless there's any other points, it looks like from our Coast Guard friends too, that there was, in reference to the parent resource guide, that it looks like they came up with a new parent resource guide, and they're happy to share that. So perhaps that can be shared in our forum so that people can pull it down. But thank you so much for your very candid and very just great discussion. I learned a ton as someone who's not a mom, so I hope everyone else gets a chance to learn it as well. Thank you again.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks.